Utah's primary election is 8 weeks away, so let's talk about what's going to happen in the congressional primaries, because the fields are set after this weekend's Republican and Democratic state conventions. I was at the Republican convention, but let's start off talking about what happened in the Democratic convention, specifically in Congressional District 1. That is the brand new Democratic-leaning district in Salt Lake County. It covers most of Salt Lake County except for the southwestern portion of it. And the Cook Political Report rates it as D plus 14. So whoever wins the Democratic nomination in November is going to be highly heavily favored to win that election. So we've got a four-way primary set for that race. Ben McAdams, Nate Bluin, Liban Mohamed, and Michael Farrell all qualified for the primary ballot through signatures. So there wasn't much drama from the convention vote on Saturday, but we still did get a bit of an upset after Liban Mohamed won the convention vote, topping Ben McAdams in the final round of voting. Now, Democrats use ranked choice voting, so all of the people who voted were asked to rank the candidates. There were 6 candidates on the ballot, rank them 1 through 6. And what they do is they tally up all of the votes, and then the candidate that is in last place, they're eliminated, and then all of their votes are redistributed to the other candidates, whoever they voted for as a second choice, and so on and so forth until we get down to the final round. And in the final round, Liban Mohamed upset Ben McAdams. A couple of things we can surmise from this. Ben McAdams, more delegates ranked him number 1 than any other candidate. And we know this because McAdams was in the lead pretty much all the way through the first 4 rounds of voting until we got to that final round where Mohamed ended up beating him because the votes from the other candidates who had been eliminated were redistributed. And over those subsequent rounds where those candidates were eliminated, Mohamed gained 188 votes, while McAdams, he only gained 43. So, and the final tally was 342 votes for Mohamed and 327 votes for McAdams. In fact, we know that the first place votes in round 1, McAdams had 284 votes, while Mohamed only had 154. In fact, Mohamed was in third place after the first round of voting. So what can we take away from that? McAdams, he's got a very strong base of support. They didn't move much, if at all, but he didn't really pick up a lot of votes as it went along. Also, we can probably say with some certainty that the progressive candidates in the race, there were 4 candidates who were running under the progressive label: Bluin, Mohamed, Michael Farrell, and Eva Lopez Chavez. They were all trying to run as progressives, and they were splitting the vote. And as those votes were redistributed, Mohamed was the beneficiary, and he ended up narrowly defeating McAdams in the 5th and final round of vote tallying. So now we move on to the primary. We've got 4 candidates in the primary. As I said before, McAdams, Bluin, Farrell, and Mohamed. I don't know how much momentum Mohamed is going to get going into the primary from this convention vote. He got some headlines, and that's good. But the problem for him and the other candidates is that McAdams has a couple of built-in advantages that's going to be very hard for them to overcome. The first one is money. McAdams has a lot more money than those other candidates. The latest FEC reports show that McAdams has more than $860,000 in his account. Second is Bluin, is at about $231,000. Farrell has almost $90,000 in the bank, and Mohamed only has around $25,000. And with 8 weeks to go, that big of a cash advantage, do not underestimate just how much of an advantage that is for McAdams. There's a campaign consultant who's worked a number of congressional campaigns here in Utah, and they told me one time that the difference between having money and not having money is running the kind of campaign you want to run versus the kind of campaign you are forced to run. And the fact that these other candidates are trailing back badly in the money race to McAdams, it means that they're going to be forced to run a leaner campaign. They're not going to be able to do as much with that money, while McAdams will have much more in terms of financial resources to buy television ads, to send out mailers, and have campaign staff working for him on that. So McAdams has a built-in advantage there. And the other one is name ID. McAdams, he's well known in the district. He was a former member of Congress. He was elected in 2018, narrowly lost to Burgess Owens in 2020. He hasn't really, been a ubiquitous personality in the news, but people in the district are aware of him. And again, don't underestimate the kind of advantage or what that does for a candidate. When you're running for office, you either have name ID or you spend the money to get name ID. And we've got 8 weeks, and there's a lot of voters in this district who don't know who Liban Mohamed is, who do not know who Michael Farrell is, who don't know who Nate Bluen is, but they've heard of Ben McAdams before. McAdams has a couple of really big advantages going into the primary, which I said is just 8 weeks away. And 8 weeks is not much time to introduce yourself to voters, let them know what you stand for, and then convince them to vote for you. Again, not making a prediction here, but I would say it's pretty clear that McAdams is the front runner heading into the primary, which is towards the end of June. The other factor that's really going to play a big role in this primary is the fact that it is an open primary. Republicans in Utah have a closed primary. That means that only registered Republicans can vote in their primary elections. Not so for Democrats. Democrats have an open primary. That means anybody can vote in that election. Of course, Democrats can vote in those primaries, but so can independents and even Republicans. They have to go to the county clerk and request a ballot, but they can do that. Republicans and independents can request a ballot for that primary. The only requirement is that they don't vote in the Republican primary. And there's not going to be a Republican primary in the 1st Congressional District, as Riley Owen won the nomination outright on Saturday. And so that changes, I think, the math for a lot of these candidates, where you not only have to appeal to Democratic voters, a wider group of Democratic voters, but you also have to become acceptable to vote for independents and even those Republicans in Salt Lake County who choose to vote in this primary election. That's what you can probably expect to happen in Congressional District 1. As I said, Republicans nominated Riley Owen on Saturday in Congressional District 1. Moving on to Congressional District 2, the big story there is that Karianne Lisonbee, state representative, forced Blake Moore into a primary. Blake Moore has never won the convention vote. He's been forced into a primary every time he's run for Congress since he first ran in 2020. He has finished second in the convention vote in 2020, 2022, 2024, and now 2026. So this is nothing new. He did ask delegates to give him the nomination outright. They chose not to do that. Karianne Lisonbee got just over 61% of the vote on Saturday to force a primary. Now, Lisonbee is going to have the same problem that a lot of the Democratic candidates have. She doesn't have much money. Moore has so much more money than she does, and Moore has name ID. She does not. In fact, according to the FEC reports, Moore has almost $2.4 million in the bank. And that's a big thing, because the primary is the election. That's the same thing that's going on in Congressional District 1 for the Democrats. The primary is pretty much the election. The winner of that is going to be a heavy favorite to win that primary. Same thing here in Congressional District 2. Whoever wins this primary is probably going to win the election in November. And Moore has $2.4 million in the bank. On the other hand, Lisonbee has just about $150,000 in the bank. Again, resources dictate what kind of campaign you run. If you have a lot of money, you can run the kind of campaign you want to run versus the kind of campaign you are forced to run. Also, there's a big name ID problem for Lisonbee. Yeah, she's been in the Utah legislature for years, but she's only had to win the vote among maybe 10,000, 15,000 voters in her district, outside of her district in the legislature, a lot of voters have no idea who the hell she is. And that's a big problem for her. So now she's got 8 weeks to try and introduce herself to voters. And again, she does not have the financial resources that will let her run a lot of television ads or send out mailers, things to get her name in front of voters ahead of that primary. A lot of the people in northern Utah are used to voting for Blake Moore. They know who Blake Moore is. They've seen him on the ballot. Those same voters have not seen Karianne Lisonbee's name on the ballot, much less a congressional ballot. And so that's a big problem for her. Give the advantage to Blake Moore heading into the primary, which is, again, is just 8 weeks away. In the 3rd congressional district, Celeste Maloy and Phil Lyman are headed to a primary election. They almost evenly split the delegate vote on Saturday, had to go to a second round of voting, and it pretty much ended with Maloy just over 50%, Lyman just under 50%. It was about a 2-point gap between the two of them. And so we head to a primary. Lyman, again, has the same problem that the other underdog candidates have in the other districts. He doesn't have a lot of money, although he does probably have equal name ID or similar name ID to Celeste Maloy, because he's run for governor in the past and he's kept his name in the news through his lawsuits, election denying, a lot of his antics. There were some rumblings on Saturday that Republican delegates had grown tired of some of Phil Lyman's antics, and it was a bit surprising that he lost the convention vote. Not by much, but he did lose the convention vote. So I don't know how that's going to translate to the primary itself, but Celeste Maloy has almost $500,000 in her bank account. Phil Lyman, he filed paperwork at the FEC saying that he had not yet raised or spent $5,000. So he doesn't have a lot of money to run his campaign for over the next 8 weeks. But as I said, name ID might be one of the things working in his advantage, because you could make an argument that he's more well-known than Maloy is. Maloy, she's sort of a policy wonk in Congress. She won in a special election in 2023, and then barely held on to her seat in 2024 when she was challenged by Colby Jenkins. She lost at the convention vote, barely avoided elimination at the convention, and then squeaked through in the primary. You could argue that Lyman has much better name ID than Jenkins did, and Jenkins almost beat Maloy in 2024. So I think that's going to be the primary to watch, and there really aren't any indications on which way that one is going to trend, whether Maloy's cash advantage is going to help her or whether Lyman's name ID, for better or for worse, helps or hurts him. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. There's no drama in Congressional District 4. Representative Mike Kennedy, he won the Republican nomination outright. He's going to be a heavy favorite to win a second term in Congress in November. That is a heavily Republican district. I think the Cook Political Report has it as R+17. So that's what you should watch for in the upcoming congressional primary elections, which are less than 8 weeks away on June 23rd. Ballots will actually go out earlier than that. So a lot of the advantages we talked about for McAdams, for Moore, those will actually be amplified because it's not 8 weeks that candidates have to introduce themselves. It's less than that because ballots start hitting mailboxes just 3 weeks before that. I'll keep an eye on all of it for you, and you can read all of my coverage at utahpolitics.news.